Hello and welcome to this special series of dialogue, Deeper Reforms, Better Opportunities. Speaking at a press conference the day after the conclusion of the third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of CPC, Chinese officials further outlined China's major reform and economic policies for the coming years. So what are the specific goals and priorities for the next 5 to 10 years in China's development? What new strategies and policies will be introduced to boost confidence and resolve pressing challenges? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Join me today are Jiandong, Unigroup Chair, Professor at PBC School of Finance of Tsinghua University; Wang Huiyao, President of Center for China and Globalization; Clare Pearson, International Development Director at Asia in DLA Piper; and David Mahon, Executive Chairman, Mahon China Investment Management. Welcome. Claire, sitting far away from China right now, what's the observation of the communique of course, the current situation, either in terms of development, in terms of, overall, it's very comprehensive here.
Jiandong, thank you very much for having me on the program. Good to see you again. Yes, I'm talking to you from London because this is China's globalization phase. China's moving from being factory of the world to being investor in the world. If I could call this communique, it'd be one thing. We've moved from planes to trains to automobiles. Planes, trains, automobiles, it's a movie, but it's also the movie that we've witnessed in the Chinese economy. So maybe from 2000, 2001, when they joined WTO, to 2010, that was the planes. That's when everyone was flying everywhere, doing business. It was a pretty polluting period, but it was a high growth, 10% GDP per annum period. And then 2010 to 2020, I'd call that the trains period. That was the good quality, instead of just growth at any cost, it was green growth. And now, I think what we're seeing now that the government is pointing us towards is what I would call the automobiles. They're sharing their experience of creating green growth, of creating a hyper-connected continent via high-speed rail. They're sharing that experience of green, good quality growth, technological innovation with the automobile era, with the EV era. So I see this now as China getting back in the driving seat of the global economy. It's had a lot of experience in the last 20 years of rapid development. And now it's sharing the lessons that it's learned from creating quality, high innovative growth with the rest of the world. Mm-hmm.
David, what's your response when you read this communique?
There's a major shift here. And it's a shift that is really, I think, really began last year. And one of the things the government got right was not try and rescue the property sector, but focus on the technology sector. And China is now going into a transition. I mean, many commentators look at China and say the economy is plateauing, the Chinese miracle's over, all the contradictions are coming home to roost. I don't view it that way. I think China is moving to the real stage of the development that was launched since Deng Xiaoping's reforms. And that is that instead of reacting and responding to global demand set by trends that are coming out of the US and Europe, China's setting trends. Yes, in electric vehicles, in solar panels, but across the board in technology, fintech is a major part of Chinese people's lives, which it's not in other countries. So we are witnessing a major shift that will take China to the next level. And I think it's going to be a very exciting few years. I don't see that in the communique. I think they're trying to be plain. I think they're trying to be matter of fact and ordinary in their statements.
Mm-hmm. Well, Huiyao, it does mention, it stresses the market. You can see, it talked about the 2035, the goal. We would have finished this building a high standard socialist market economy in all respects in 2035. And it also said that is a guarantee for the ultimate goal of the Chinese modernization. So obviously the priority is given, to this high standard market economy.
Yes, I think there's quite a few highlights that I'm very impressed with. I think first of all, this is a long due that conference that rallied the confidence, but also they propose a lot of new ideas, which I think some if it's one sentence, it's meant a lot. But first of all, I think they give a first endorsement is on the market economy. I mean, they still wants to maintain market economy. That's really big news because people were wondering would they shift the trend or maybe adopt different approaches. But they emphasize the high quality market economy is still the strong preference of Chinese government. That is really important. Second, I think, of course, they're going to build a modernization of Chinese style, which they find a way to combine, for example, for example, the hybrid economy that China has, the private sectors, the SOE, the multinationals. They are really a trilateral economy that you don't see anywhere in the world. That's very strong. So that they're going to come, continue. They mention all those things, how to do SOE reform, how to encourage the private sectors, how to work on more foreign investment. That's great. And thirdly, what I impressed the most is they talk about integration of rural and urban. So the urbanization of China is probably low-hanging fruit. That is really going to be the biggest driver for the Chinese economy in the next 5 to 10 years, because, for example, there's only there's about 67% of urbanization, but people with the hukou and it's only 50%. So there's about 300 million migrant workers needs to be upgraded or going to become consumers. They're going to spend. They talk about rural land reform actually. So which means they could probably sell their household land and get the first bucket of the capital to buy the second-hand apartment in the city, which is going to revolutionize the real estate market, probably stabilize for some time. So this is something maybe is coming. They talk about how to really push for the productive forces to move freely and all those all the elements of the economy should really have no barriers to flow. So between rural and the city. So I think this is great. And finally, I was quite impressed also. They emphasize again scientific development, talent development, education, and so all those things combined, with the best infrastructure they have. I'm sure this kind of straightforward policy, and then this more confidence building, and also, of course, livelihood of the ordinary people will be still the goal of the party to strive for. I would think all those things combined. I'm going to wait what the details coming up on those concrete policies, but I think they're going to push China forward, particularly with this urbanization revolution that is 300 million migrant workers. Now, no country has that. China has that, and upgrade them and let them sell their household land. That's going to solve a new consumptions and spendings and upgrading. So China still have a lot of a good time ahead with this new breakthrough policy that probably going to unleash. So I'm very optimistic on that.
Well, Jiandong, of course, speakers of this specific reforms. Of course, people are expecting, for example, there's a talk about the tax reforms. As a way, I guess, to deal with local debt, one of the challenges, along with the real estate sector for China, and financial reforms. Tell us more in that direction. What are you expecting out of the government policies in terms of tax reform, in terms of dealing with the local debt issue here?
Some people would argue, say, local government should withdraw from the market to become small government. That's not the type of China. In China, the local government, it's very crucial, take the very crucial role for investing for the local economic development. And in past 20 years, this local development, local investment heavily rely on the land sectors, the real estate sectors. Now we need to transform. We need to transform this financing financing mechanism to a new way. So in that sense, these tax reforms tax reforms plus these real estate stabilizations will be quickly settled down to solve the immediate problems, solve the short-term problems.
Looking outside, of course, David, here is, as we heard from the package earlier, the opening up is the defining feature of the Chinese modernization. Of course, opening up itself is not something new. But here, obviously, the message is like China will continue, and opening up will be the integral part of the Chinese modernization. Without opening up, there won't be the Chinese modernization. This is against the background of the decoupling, or the talk, or the practice decoupling from Washington. Some practice from European countries. So this is, can we say this is the right response, at such times, major economies decoupling or de-risking from each other. Opening up is necessary for China and for the world, let's say.
Yes, I think it's a pity that after so many decades at a major plenum, the government needs to reiterate that it is opening up, because it has opened up and has remained open. It's also a pity that the government needs to remind not just foreign observers, but also business people and those in China that the market reforms and the private sector are important, because people begin to judge that that's not the case. There's this strange assumption that China wants to close down and that really it's a state-owned, it wants to become more of a state-owned economy again, which is a totally misreading of the party and government's aims. So it's a strange thing, because China's a third of world trade. Its deficits with other countries have increased. The world talks about decoupling, but it can't. Everyone is inextricably bound economically to such an extent that, yes, some companies will pull back. I think the American economy will become more isolated from everybody. That'll be a trend that will last for some years, but ultimately China is one of the main engines of growth globally and will continue to be so. So I feel a bit sorry for speechwriters and policymakers having to remind people of what is blindingly obvious if you look at the economy and you look at the data. But yeah, I've no doubt that China is open, and it will become actually more open as others talk about decoupling, but don't in fact.
Clare, of course, the private sector, this foreign investment, private investment, and of course, we talk about state economy there. There's a stress, basically on the, I would say, equality between this different ownership. They say, there's talk about, the need to ensure equal access to resources, fair participation in market competition, equal legal protection for all types of ownership economies in accordance with the law, either state-owned, privately-owned, foreign-owned. So that's encouraging, let's say. Many people have been talking about this, and they are, of course, talking about the rule of law importance. One of the Chinese senior officials said that the rule of law makes the best business environment. And he talked about the basically a private economy promotion law, law to promote private economy. What's your response, when you heard of this news?
But Jiandong, I absolutely welcome this news, because what I've witnessed recently is there's an increasing amount of investment coming into China from outside, because the Western and the Chinese economies are highly complementary. So there's a lot of opportunity for win-win investment. And of course, the lawyers are involved in that, because very often we're the conveners when a deal takes place. And what I've noticed is that the government, the visa-free policies for Europe, for example, the government is trying to encourage the interaction. Things became, during the travel hiatus over COVID, things were a bit slower. But now I've seen a real catalyst, it's a really catalytic period in terms of bilateral trade. For example, I was just in Manchester a couple of weeks ago, and Jiandong Airlines opened a 3-time-a-week flight to Manchester, which will already complement the Hainan Air's flight, which is 7 times a week from Beijing to Manchester. So what I'm finding is people are increasingly trading with China. It's not always apparent in the news, but the lawyers are there. I know this because our law firm grew from 2 people in 2002 in Shanghai to about 75 people in Shanghai today and similar in Beijing, which opened in 2005. Rule of law is just there to give people confidence that the money is going where it needs to go at the right time to the right people. And I see no lack of confidence. I'm over in London because there was a big energy transition conference for our global partners in London. But of course, they're talking about Chinese technology when they talk about solar, they talk about wind power, they're talking about Chinese technology. So China is deeply embedded in the green growth, which will dominate market economies as the world burns. We all know climate change is the biggest issue of our generation, and China is looking for creative solutions to that with global partners.
What's behind the next door? What motivates us to find the truth? To understand the world, we must see it from different angles. Never stop searching. Go deeper. Go further. Be open-minded. Be engaged. Open the door through dialogue, where ideas do matter.
I mean, if people just look at the remarks by the officials, or reports in the media, it's a bit different from what's really going on the ground.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I just flew to DC recently. I stopped off in Istanbul. Oh, I'd never been to Istanbul airport, I'll be honest. But then I thought, crikey, am I in Heathrow? There were 19 million passengers passed through Istanbul airport last year. 21 million passed through Heathrow. So maybe this year, Istanbul will become the busiest airport. Why? Because when I was in that airport, we saw 200 people from Sichuan. They were heading to Latin America where, they're doing an infrastructure project. The airport, I travel constantly. I've done about 90 flights a year for 20 years, apart from the COVID period. And one thing I notice in the airports is there's a completely different demographic. There's groups of Chinese, they're going global, they're taking their companies global. And why am I flying? Because I'm based in Beijing. I'm going out with Chinese clients to meet their foreign partners, to sign the joint venture deals which facilitate global growth, global green growth, I should say. Because one thing I really noticed when I was in London, I was in a meeting last week with some Chinese clients, and they talked about inevitable peace. I was in another meeting with some foreign clients, and they talked about global constant conflict. I think in China, the inevitable peace is because the government and the people are so heavily invested in economic growth. They're not really concerned about getting involved in geopolitical conflicts because the fight today, if you like, it's not against each other. It's against climate change. And China is so acutely aware of the impacts of climate change within its own borders that is making sure that green growth is available to other countries. And I'm really enjoying the joint ventures that we're able to do globally to facilitate sort of global cooling, if you like. Mm-hmm. And what I really love about China is that instead of having to fly now, I can just always take the high-speed train. One thing I also noticed is the train that goes from Chongqing to Duisburg in Germany. It used to go 1,700 times a year in 2016, but in 2023, there were 17,000 train journeys from China to Europe, Europe to China. So when people talk about decoupling, or they talk about America first, Europe first, China first, they need to talk about humanity first. They need to talk about green growth facilitated by green transport, which is Chinese high-speed rail, which is making Europe the Western Peninsula of China to a degree, because we're connected by a train now. That's the difference. It's the transport revolution facilitated by China's innovative Belt and Road project that is catalysing business when there's difficulty in the Red Sea. There's no difficulty getting a train from central China to central Germany.
David, of course, you earlier mentioned about the visa-free arrangement, between China and other countries, or most of them like a unilateral visa-free arrangement, treatment from the Chinese side, and also the 144 hours, I believe, visa-free basically stay in China. It's being expanded, this mechanism. So more and more people are coming to China and they have a look with their own eyes. And then they get this real impression of what China is like, which is but different from what they get from their officials, from their governments, from their media. That helps a lot probably in terms of, the people understand the Chinese desire to embrace the world instead of being isolated from the world.
I think that's right. We've yet to see the fruits of it, though. I mean, in reality, I agree. China is doing business, people are investing, but people aren't coming back, despite statements from cities that the foreigners have returned and the links to global trade are now being brought together again. It is not happening. We're involved with businesses, our own clients in China, where very, very hard to find good people because the Chinese who are internationally qualified, multilingual, they've been taken up by big companies. They're in positions that used to be inhabited by expatriates. And it's hard to get people to come to China. It's hard to get companies who are not here to think anew and say, right, I'll go to China next year because of the massive negative press. So I think we have a problem. I agree we're growing well. I agree we remain linked to the world. But in that area of, is the term soft power, we're still struggling. And that's why the government has granted so many visa concessions to other countries, because it knows it's not getting the people it wants. I mean, look at our colleagues on the screen who are academics in the world of universities in China. Some are struggling to keep those links to their partner universities globally. So it's a difficult time. And I think China will find ways to frame the narrative better, but we need to encourage foreigners to stop reading the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the Economist, and look at other sources and realize it's a very different place, and it is a good place to live. But there's a reluctance. So I think we're still to see the fruits of these efforts.
Yes. Huiyao, picking up what you have said earlier, of course, many signals, many policy directions you see are very encouraging, as we talked about, the protection of the private sector or the promotion law in terms of helping the private sector to grow. I mean, equality being stressed between the private sector and, of course, state sector. I think for a lot of people, that's very encouraging. That means the emphasis of the market economy, and of course, in the market economy, talk about fairness, different participants. So that, for a long-term point of view, that will play a very important role in terms of boosting economic growth there.
Absolutely. I think the private sector, probably including multinationals and foreign investment enterprises, I think they suffered a bit during the COVID because that was a worldwide virus lockdown. China probably suffered quite heavily on that. But restored confidence needs some time. Of course, this year is better than last year. Last year is better than the year before. I'm sure we need a highest level, the biggest third planet, the high level communicate to reassure the private sector and multinationals and the foreign investment again that China is seeking an equal treatment, fairly handling of all the affairs, despite your type of a business, whether it's SOE, private or foreign enterprise. So that is really assuring, and it's good to hear. I think it's never overemphasized. It needs to be emphasized, but emphasized at this kind of level and this kind of seriousness, this kind of sincerity. I think that probably will gradually bring back the confidence. Of course, I'm sure people are coming back. The airports are getting busy, as Clare mentioned. There's so many things going on, and people, also if you want to make money, where on earth can you find a place where it's a 400 million middle class? And Premier Lee said in the next decade going to be 800 million And if you want to make a big business, China is probably the best place, best synergy, best infrastructure, and best 5G. Just 5G, China has almost 4 million 5G stations. And in Europe, it's only 400,000. So you can see the synergy, and plus the 12 million fresh graduates of college every year. It's enormous. I mean, so I think this is a process. I mean, this is a process in the making. I'm sure, the business community will gain back their confidence, and they will come back. And so this third planning has just served that purpose, assuring the domestic international business community that China is still on the track of opening up. And now they're talking about opening up to promote reform, which is reforms through opening up. That's a new term I heard. So that's really great. Mm-hmm. So it means opening up is still on the top priority, and I'm sure that is really good to assure everyone. I'm sure the country will gradually back on track, and even on this from high speed to high quality. That is what we need, and China will still have a good time ahead.
Thank you, Huiyao, and thank you, David, Clare, and Jiandong. With that, we come to the end of today's discussion, and many thanks again to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.